How are you guys? I'm Adam Stelly from the Branding Rebellion, and you are witnessing the first pilot episode of the Branding Rebellion cast. And today we're with Jazmine Lalicker, the owner, founder, entrepreneur behind the Shuckery Parlor right here in downtown Petaluma in the wine country of California. How are you, Jazz?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Sure thing. Yeah, it's a pleasure and it's an honor. So let's dive right in. So how did this come to be? Take us through that.
Sure. Well,
I
I first had the idea. My mom was an entrepreneur. She had several businesses when she was a young woman. And my sister started a business called the Oyster Girls. And I worked for her for about 10 years. And, you know, working with family, they say, can be one of the hardest things that you can do.
Been there, yeah.
But it's also one of the most rewarding.
Yeah.
I mean, to really get to know your family on a different level, that's a lot of things that not everyone gets that experience in life.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have traded that for anything. And she's always been encouraging and inspiring. I've always loved restaurants. I've always loved hospitality. I love to throw a good party. I love to entertain, welcome people into my home. And so I thought, well, I'll just open my own restaurant, my own oyster bar.
Wow. So you mentioned, you spoke on your mom and how she was a young woman, owned and operated several businesses. And you touched on how being able to see your family and people close to you in that light. What were some of the things you may have seen in your mom that you thought was really cool, that was really like, hey, I see her doing that, and one day I'm looking forward to doing that? What were some of those attributes you saw in your mom that really inspired you to take that step?
I think that one of the top things that my mother gave us was just the curiosity. So around the dinner table, you know, we weren't a big TV family. We would actually kind of sit around and think of business ideas. Oh, well, wouldn't this be fun? Or try to solve problems, or you know, see a need and come up with something to solve that. And that was just a really natural way that we all communicated. And I think so she gave us that sight to look at the world in a little bit different way. And now that I'm older, I see that as, you know, that's where true entrepreneurial spirit comes from.
Wow, that was heavy. So what does your mom like to do now, you think? Does she come often, or?
My mom, she actually helps my sister and I both run our businesses now. So it's pretty special, it's pretty full circle, and otherwise she would never get to see us. We're always working.
Yeah, and so to dive into the background some more, and I think, and I'm sure our viewers would agree too, that it's really inspiring to have someone that close to you really lead the way, and as you said yourself, to give you sight, right? To be able to constructively come up with solutions and ideas and business ideas. And I think the general populace, especially up-and-coming business people, will really be interested and really intrigued that they're probably not the only ones who have these really cool ideas that start with family at a table somewhere, right? So getting back into your background, where are you and your mom from? Where's your family from?
My mom's from Texas, but she fell in love and had my sister and I both in Mexico, actually.
Wow.
And then we grew up in Oklahoma.
Wow.
My sister went to college out here in California, so that's how we ended up here. So we've always been a tight-knit family. And I probably wouldn't have told you that whole story 5 years ago, but I'm very proud now that to be a Mexican-American, I would say I kind of hid behind my business or hid behind the brand a little bit before this whole COVID thing. It just felt safer. And now I feel like I want to celebrate that part of me. And I think it's given some new light and some new insight to my business and to me.
Wow, wow. It's so interesting how even, you know, as we're highlighting you and your journey as an entrepreneur and we're especially highlighting women in leadership, I think it's really interesting that how what you're communicating is that you're path isn't always linear, right? And how you've discovered new parts of yourself, and that you've really put a stronger foot forward to let your authentic voice be heard. Would you agree?
I would.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is exciting.
Yeah.
It's exciting to sort of, I think, being an entrepreneur, if you're not open to exploring yourself as well, then that can put a block on your creativity and sort of stop the process in a lot of ways.
So then in other words, what you're saying is, as an entrepreneur, there's also a certain degree of self-exploration.
Always.
Just the way you look, yeah. No, you hit it. That's a good point, Jazz. So, as we spoke off camera a bit, you mentioned that now with that you're sharing more of your authentic voice with people, and not just, as you mentioned, hiding behind your brand, that you also want to get the Shuckery more connected to the community and not just be focused on just what people see at face value in serving. Can you unpack that some more for us?
Yeah, it really comes from this initial idea of wanting to open a restaurant and to, welcome people in and to have that party every night here. You can see the space is beautiful, the setting is beautiful. But when COVID happened and all of that energy went away, I had to search for something new. What kept me coming to, why did I want to continue to come to work? And in finding that new meaning, it was really, instead of serving my community, I wanted to connect with them on a different level. And it's two parts, because my staff, who is very important to me, I love creating a company culture, but they were struggling. So I wanted to see them, I needed to remain open for them, so that I could see them not only survive, but to thrive.
Well said. Well said. And do you, in the daily operations, and now that you are really steadfast about remaining open, and you're navigating and you're pivoting around the current environment that's come from COVID-19, as you look at your staff and you're able to be surrounded by them every day, do you really get that sense of joy and pride that now you are able to fight through that and facilitate that feeling of thriving for them?
Yeah, it's what drives me right now. And might not be what drives me 3 months from now, but it's what is really driving me right now.
Yeah, and I think it's really beautiful because, as we mentioned before, that we have these ideas about getting into business, and sometimes we have these grandiose ideas about just being bosses and about having our names attached to something that we started. But I think there's really something beautiful about what you said about focusing on your people, right? And making sure that they feel taken care of and that they feel significant, and making sure, and correct me if we're wrong, but what you're saying is that they have identity and a position and a voice beyond just serving plates to people.
100%. I know that I can't do this alone. I can't cook the food, answer the phone, serve my customers, choose product. It takes a team, and I want them to know that I can't do it alone, and that I value them and I appreciate them, and I really try to show them that. I know that's what I want. I want to be valued and appreciated, so why not give that back and start there?
That's really good. Yeah, it's really good. And I think it's really cool and quite intriguing how you even stay in touch with your own individuality and your own humanity. And it sounds like, even as an entrepreneur, you're pretty self-reflective. And I think that it's really neat because it translates to your work. Right?
Thank you.
Yeah. And through that self-reflection, it looks like now you're able to say, okay, so what would I want if I were in their shoes, right? And how would I want to be treated? Though this is probably cliche to say, how would I want to be treated if it were flipped around, right? And I think that the fact that you can comfortably do that and not only have the idea, but then implement it clearly, because the culture in here is wonderful, which we'll touch on later. I think that you're really onto something good.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It has bitten me ass in a couple times, but
Yeah.
I think it's worth it overall.
Yeah, yeah, and it can bite you in the ass, Jazz, because, and then sometimes it can almost be sort of discouraging, like, man, I was trying to put myself in your shoes and you didn't show up, or you quit and didn't let me know, or man, I thought we had solidarity behind the mission we have here at the Shuckery. So take us through and explain for the viewers as well, still keeping that same rationale even when you get bitten in the ass.
Whew. Well,
Take your time, I know it's a lot.
that's a big question.
Yeah.
I think that the most important part of entrepreneurship is really showing up, no matter how you're feeling. Whether you're feeling like, man, yesterday knocked me down, or, today, sometimes you just don't feel well. You wake up, not sick, but say the sun hasn't been shining, like you just are down, but you can't be down when you're leading a team. And I think that is actually the hardest thing that I've had to do, is come to work and be a leader when I just don't want to lead that day.
Wow. Thank you for that level of transparency, first off. So let's dive a bit deeper into that. Do you, in your opinion, don't let me put words in your mouth here, but in your opinion, do you think that sometimes when people have an idea and they start something out of the feel good, but then when they wake up some of those days and they don't have the feeling of motivation, do you think that's why some people's dreams aren't sustainable or don't come to light? Or talk about that. The consistency of going, in other words, outside of not feeling it on a particular day.
Sure. I think that precise feeling is what sets people apart that make it from that don't make it. Because even when you're not feeling it, you really just have to still put forth the effort and know that your vision, or whatever you want, or whatever you're doing, for me it's oysters.
Yeah.
It's real and it's tangible, and I'm gonna feel differently the next day. You have to realize that your mood and energy can change around it. Otherwise, you're just gonna hold yourself back. It's a balance of recognizing your feelings, but also you gotta keep moving forward.
Yeah.
One foot in front of the other.
Yeah. So with taking it one foot in front of the other, I think it's really interesting because when people assess a market or when they assess an environment, whether you're going to open a new restaurant or a shoe store or an eyelash bar, hair bar, one thing that people do when they open a business is they look at their external environment, right? So they look at supply chain, they look at competitors. And I think what you're talking about is really important because people need to also look at themselves as leaders and entrepreneurs. And I think what you've shared is really heavy and it really resonates, and it should resonate with people, because what it says is the external environment is full of things we can't control, right? We can't stop a new restaurant from opening up the road. We can't stop that next eyelash bar, that next hair salon from opening. But one thing that we can control is our consistency and how we move and how we navigate through those things that you mentioned. Like if you feel down, pressing and persevering on anyway. And those small things as, okay, I may not feel it, but this morning my staff needs me. Leadership isn't a feeling, leadership is action, right? And I think leadership can also really be love, because love is an action word, right? And I think that as we wrap up, I think that that's really what it sounds like to me, that you lead with authenticity, you lead with consistency, and you lead with love. And I think that's a result of some of the self-reflection that you just shared with us.
You couldn't have said it better. If you don't love what you do, you're not gonna make it. It won't last. You gotta love it.
Wow, that's really good, Jazz. So next up, as we go into the break, we'll be in the Oyster Parlor with Jazz, and she'll be shucking some oysters for us. We'll be going over when you should harvest an oyster, what is harvesting an oyster, what it looks like. We'll talk about her organizational culture. We'll talk about more of the inner workings of her business and the rationale of how she runs the business. And hopefully we inspired you guys along the way. So we'll see you there. Hey, you guys, welcome back. And we're here at the Shuckery Parlor in downtown Petaluma in the heart of Sonoma County. And we're back with Jazz, and I think that she's shucking some oysters for us, right?
I am. I'm shucking some local Hog Island oysters today, and I can't wait to teach you a little bit about them. I know you come in, you love to enjoy them, but let's dive right in.
Sounds good. So you said Long Island, so take us through where some of it comes from.
So, Hog Island. So we work with 3 local companies primarily. The biggest growers in our local Tamales Bay are Tamales Bay Oyster Company, Hog Island Oyster Company, and some of you might know Drake's Bay Oyster Company.
Yeah.
They're now actually still cultivating their oysters, but in Baja, California.
So what are some of the peak times to pick an oyster, or do you harvest oysters? How does that work?
You do harvest oysters, and the peak time is what would be opposite of what you would think. You know, we love to go out in the summertime when it's warm and have oysters and champagne, but the best time for oysters is right now. It's the winter when the water temperature is nice and cold, that the oyster is just at its peak.
Wow.
When the water warms up is when oysters spawn, and so it makes the oyster have a creamy texture because they're spawning. And that is, they're safe to eat, but not everyone enjoys that flavor and texture.
So the flavor is going to be different than when they're spawning versus the prime time to harvest them.
Yes, and the flavor depends on where you eat the oyster, where the oyster's from. So, you know, our local Tamales Bay oyster, it's nice, it's briny, it's a cold water oyster. If you're eating oysters from, let's say, the East Coast, they have not only different species of oyster that they primarily cultivate, but it's a different shape, different texture, different flavor.
I had no idea. Well, I thought that a good oyster was just a good oyster, so now I know. So take us through the shucking process now. What's happening here?
Yes. So when I'm shucking an oyster, first thing you want to do is check for quality. So there's 3 basic parts of the oyster: the lid, the hinge, and the cup. So there's all kinds of different knives. I've got a smaller oyster, somebody use a smaller oyster knife. I'm going to insert my knife into the hinge. Now, I personally think that women make really great oyster shuckers because it's not actually a force. It's more of like a caress, and you have to just kind of find the movement because it's connected at the muscle, which is here and here on the oyster. So I put my knife in the hinge, I wiggle, turn it like a key to a car. I'm gonna slide my knife across the top of the shell, so I sever that top muscle. This one here, make sure there's no shell bits in the oyster. Sever the bottom shell, make sure it's nice and loose, no shell bits. Of course, you can't have oysters without a little bit of fresh lemon.
Nice touch. So you mentioned the shell bits, so I'm guessing if a customer were to get an oyster with shell bits in it, would that be equivalent to a customer eating like an omelet with eggshells in it?
Yeah, that's great. I've actually never heard that as a synonym, but that would be the equivalence.
Wow. Well, nice detail. That's neat. You want to come on over and we can dive into some more questions?
I'd love to.
Yeah. Wow. So when you eat your oysters, Jazz, what do you like to eat them with? Do you like to eat them on their own?
I love to eat my oysters. We call it a naked oyster or natural oyster. So just as it comes, the oyster has a natural liqueur, a little bit of salt water in the oyster. So I first like to just really get the flavor of the oyster. You know, sometimes they're eating a really nice green seaweed, and you can taste that. Sometimes they're by a fresh water source, so it could be a bit sweeter and not as salty. And then I like to put a little bit of lemon, and then I like to do all the sauces.
Wow. So do you find that a lot of your guests and your customers like them in a similar way, or do some people prefer them this way and that way? Or when they come to the Shuckery, do you normally guide them on how they should eat the oyster the right way?
Well, we're always here to offer guidance, but I always say there's no wrong way to eat an oyster. It's kind of like an Oreo.
Yeah. Wow. So In terms of, so I know earlier on in the show, we talked about your staff and we talked about your rationale behind your management style and how the Shuckery came to be. So to dive into that, what's it like when you're like scaling your process or teaching the rest of your staff your oyster shucking process? Take us through some of that.
Yeah, so one thing I love about oysters is its true connection to its history. Oysters used to be fed to prisoners, right? They were the poor man's food. And now, you know, they've gone through this history of being cultivated, and now it's a really, you know, oysters, caviar, oysters, champagne. So to really take the oyster back to its roots is where I like to start. And so teaching people, you know, this isn't something to be afraid of. It's a learned skill. And I love to teach the youth. I hire a lot of young people because I like to teach skills.
Love that.
And so it's great, you know, I can teach you to become a professional oyster shucker too. It just takes practice, dedication. So having those basic building blocks is something that I really, it's a tangible thing that you can hold in your hand, and then you can take them through the building blocks that work for so many other skills in life.
And it definitely sounds like a lot of building blocks, because just when you were demonstrating and you were talking about connecting this muscle and that side and holding it this way and that way, that's quite of a building block. So definitely props to you on your management style for being able to scale that and teach your team.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah. And so do you find that, well, not do you find, but are oysters normally served in the beginning of the meal, like an appetizer, during, or after?
I don't get between an oyster lover and their oysters. So traditionally, they are served in the beginning of the meal. You know, if you're really thinking about your palate, then you want to start with something, it's cold, it's raw, and it's briny. So it really starts to get everything working to take you on to maybe something that's then fried and salty, and then into your main course. It's going to be more savory before dessert. That's sweet. So it's definitely a palate starter.
Nice touch. And so you, thus far, you took us through how to shuck an oyster. You went about telling us how you train and teach your staff and the rationale behind the building blocks of oyster shucking. You mentioned accompaniments and things that come after the oyster. So what are some of your favorite things on your menu right now?
What I love most about my menu is we stay really seasonal. You mentioned we're in the heart of Sonoma County, so there are a lot of great local farmers to work with and local fishermen. So I keep everything here. I keep it local. I know that sounds a little tagline-y, but you won't find mahi-mahi on our menu. It's a fish that I personally love, but I'm not going to fly that over from Hawaii. You know, so we might have a smaller selection of fish because I just serve West Coast, so anything that's from, you know, Washington, Alaska down to Baja. But it's always going to be super fresh, and then accompanied by whatever is seasonal.
Yeah, and so to backtrack a bit as well, did your heart for the local entrepreneur and the local business people, was that always there, or was that something that you sort of uncovered as you dove deeper into running and owning a restaurant?
My connections with actual farmers, I would say that started with my sister's business, the Oyster Girls.
Yeah.
She started a traveling oyster bar, which is our catering portion. They serve the Bay Area. Awesome, super fun. I kind of miss being an oyster girl. I'll always be an oyster girl at heart. She really connected me to the local oyster farmers, and she took me out to the farms. We used to harvest our own oysters for events, and it is really hard work, let me tell you. But what I loved about it was the dichotomy of oyster farming. I mean, you're in waders, you're in cold water, the wind is blowing, you're out at the bay, and then we'd spray wash all the mud off, and then we would go get dressed up, put on lipstick, high heels, and go shuck oysters at an event. Super fun to go through both sides of that, you know, and take something that's really like tough and manly and show the feminine side of shucking oysters.
Wow. And do you feel like by harvesting them yourselves with the Oyster Girls and with your team, and the dichotomy of that you mentioned, do you feel like now you've carried that rugged and beautiful balance now being a solo entrepreneur?
100%. That gave me that strong attachment to your product. Is something that can't be lost. And if I didn't have that, I certainly could have lost my way a few different times.
Strong attachment to your product. I love that. So if you were to, whether someone was looking to get into a similar business, like owning a restaurant and running a restaurant, or whether they're out there and they're a graphic designer, or they want to open a shoe shop, or a completely virtual business, do you think that as they carry on and as they get started, that to have that real authentic connection with the product is imperative from the start?
Yes. I think my one advice to anyone who is wanting to be an entrepreneur is 100% to make sure that you have the one thing that you love about whatever it is that you're doing in your industry, because you are going to be beat down in so many different ways, and you're going to be seeing stars. So if you're going to need that one thing that you can remember to really hold on to that tight, so that you don't lose your way.
That's so good, because so oftentimes people, especially those in our age demographic and young professionals, they fall in love with this idea of business and this idea of spearheading and starting something on their own, and they fall in love with the idea of leadership and ownership, but they forget that authentic, true love connection, that small thing that even mornings when they wake up and they don't really feel the motivation, they have those specific reminders that's really nestled in their hearts to keep them carried on. And I think that sounds a lot like what you just mentioned. And would you say that's what's carried you through since you opened back in 2016?
Yes, 100%. I mean, because you can take the lessons or the love for that one, for me, it's the love of oysters. And then what comes with that is creating community, it's creating bonds, it's, oysters represent celebration, it's a party. I have a party in my restaurant every night. It's really been a fun job.
Wow. And with your experience in these last 4 going on 5 years, do you see your customers and your clients really revel in that celebration, and do you feel like that energy transfers to your clients and it keeps them coming back?
I was able to create the culture, and I feel very fortunate that by sticking true to what I love and the idea of the way I wanted to run my restaurant, the Shuckery. I've been through 5 different chefs in 5 years. I'm not a chef owner, which is what's more traditional in a restaurant. You're a chef, you can create wonderful food, and then you open a restaurant. For me, it was the love of oysters, the love of hosting. I'm a front of the house gal. And so to have this idea of a restaurant and then find essentially a business partner, which is a really big deal. They have to share in your ideals, and they have to share that love and passion. So that's been one of my biggest challenges in the restaurant.
Wow, so you just gave us a lot. So we're gonna backtrack, and we're gonna talk more about your culture and your 5 chefs. So we're definitely gonna touch on that. Yeah, so with the culture, and it's a really good word you use, because organizational culture is one of the, if not the toughest things to not only create, but sustain over the life cycle of a business, right? So in terms of instilling that culture of celebrating around oysters, and your clients and your customers and your team that's clearly bought in, right? And they clearly care about your local brand. Take us through, big or small, whatever it means to you, what that process of really creating that culture looked like. Did it come from training? Did it come from just creating a vibration and an energy? Or did it come from repetitive action over time? Take us through some of that too.
Okay, that's a great question. I would say that it really has come from having the idea that I wanted to do this a little bit differently. I grew up in restaurants. I've been working in restaurants since I was 16. I'm 32 now. And I just decided that I didn't want the typical, it's very pitted against each other. This is a little specific, but front of the house versus back of the house. There's always, why do these people make tips and more money and these people work harder? And I don't know, it just wasn't very succinct. And I never understood why, because it takes so many moving parts just to get a beautiful plate of food out to a customer.
Yeah.
And the chef can't do it alone, and the servers can't do it alone. And then you have all of the service staff in between. So my goal was to really create something like this life cycle of an oyster. I really do go back to oysters every time when I think about this. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But how do I create something that allows people, they really understand that they have to rely on each other, and that they can rely on me, and I need my staff too. Otherwise, my dreams can't be realized. So that's the basis of my culture, is just appreciating each other, so that we can all make money and we can all be happy when we come to work. I have to spend a lot of time here, and I don't want to do it with bad attitudes.
Right, because people will, most of us spend more time working than we do at home or with our loved ones or out having fun. So I really like that you actively and with authenticity and with a plan that you can come into your space and really feel that, because you really offer something special in that. Even when I've come here in the 2 years that I've been around, it's very clear that you guys operate as one. It's real. It's warm, but it's competent, right? When you talk to one of your staff members, they know the menu, they can give solid recommendations, yet the vibe isn't uptight, because as you mentioned, oysters can be this celebratory thing, but I really, and I've also heard from others that they love that they're knowledgeable and they're competent, but still warm and inviting. And I think that's something special that you have, and it's hard to achieve. And then one more thing, so props to you, congratulations on that.
Thank you, that means a lot.
And then to touch on the final point, you mentioned that you went through 5 chefs. So take me through the process, because what's so interesting about partnering with people and working with people is, on day one, you vibe on the dream, you vibe on the goals. A resume can look good, experience can look good. They can talk a good game, right? And they really may be good, but just not a good fit for where you want to go, right? And for the culture and idea that you want to instill. So with the menu change, and now with your current chef, how did you know that was a good fit? And how has that benefited your business since? Take us through that.
Okay. Well, I've learned a lot. And I'm still learning every day, otherwise I wouldn't be doing this job. Once I'm finished learning life lessons, whether they're good or whether they kick me in the ass, then it's on to the next thing. But for now, I'm still learning how to judge people. Like you said, resume, everyone puts their best foot forward. I would say that a couple, advantages or disadvantages. I was 27 when I opened the restaurant, first restaurant, so I had a lot to learn there. My biggest lesson was make sure that you can do everything in your own business, because then you won't be afraid to move on if that person that you chose isn't the right fit for any reason. So now I can cook everything in my kitchen.
Well, that's good. Wow, that's a good take. And as we wrap up, are there any final things you want to say or that you want to talk about, or something that's on your heart, or just any piece of advice? It doesn't have to be deep or really profound, but any last thoughts that you want to share with the people?
Yeah, I would. I would say that being an entrepreneur, people tell you that you can have it all. Yeah. And I think that is a little bit of a farce. I think that is a little bit of a lie. You're always going to have to sacrifice something, But if you can become okay with that, then I think that you won't feel so bad and you won't be so hard on yourself of trying to, you know, be the perfect business person and know everything and, you know, still be able to make it to your friend's birthday party or the wedding or have to miss holidays. Some area of your life is going to sacrifice. So you can't have it all, but you can get pretty close.
Wow. Well, there you have it, you guys. So today we were at the Shuckery. We got a chance to talk to Jazz, the founder, owner, entrepreneur behind this wonderful local brand right here in downtown Petaluma, the heart of Sonoma County. Thank you guys so much, and stay tuned for some more Branding Rebellion content coming out soon.